Hi, this is Mr. Shanahan for Magnet Sociology, and this is Chapter 12, The Family. We'll start out talking about a case study, the myth of the traditional family. Then we'll go on to Section 1, Family Systems and Functions. Section 2, Families in the United States. Section 3, Recent Trends in Marriage and Family. And then we'll talk about a lab at the end. So, the traditional family structure of working father, stay-at-home mother, and children who attend school has rarely been prevalent in the family structure in the United States. In pre-industrial times, the family was the center of economic activity, and the authority patterns were patriarchal. Mothers made food and clothes and often produced goods or services to be sold or traded. Industrialization saw many children become workers as well as both parents. Currently, many women work outside the home. Some sociologists suggest that telecommuting may make the home a major center of economic activity again. The picture on the left here shows what we used to call a cottage industry. Cottage industry is where they would bring the raw materials to your house or your cottage, and your family would make these things in the home and then take it back to the manufacturer. This was largely a practice that existed before the time of factories. The factories made the cottage industry largely extinct, though it does still exist. And in the previous slide, we mentioned how teleworking might return us to this kind of method. This was done as a way of producing expensive equipment in the home rather than having very expensive equipment. You would have people doing the labor at home, either providing their own equipment or doing it by hand, which was more cost effective for the entrepreneur. The picture on the right shows today most paying work takes place outside the home. Most of us leave and go work somewhere else. Families spend much of the time away from each other. And here, this is where the kids go off to school and the parents go off to work, whatever type of job they have. And so this is what's most common in today's society, though, like I mentioned, it's kind of drifting back the other way. Section 1, Family Systems and Function. Families throughout the world follow similar patterns. Family organization is determined by how societies answer questions of authority and relationships. The family's most important functions include reproduction, socialization, and economic security. Our main idea in this section will be that families follow the variety of organizational patterns, but they all fulfill common functions. So you should be able to answer the following questions at the end of this section. What are the three major family systems? Do all societies use the same marriage and kin parent patterns? And what are the basic functions of the family? All right, the three types of families are the nuclear family. One of both parents and their children are most recognizable in the United States. The family of orientation is the nuclear family into which the person is born or adopted. When a person marries, a new nuclear family is formed called a family of procreation. An extended family is a family of 2 or more generations. So that would be ma, pa, grandma, and granddad. Okay, so you might have that, an extended family. Kinship is a network of people who are related by marriage, birth, or adoption. Primary relatives are mother, father, sister, brother, spouse, daughter, and son. Secondary relatives are grandparents, grandchildren, in-laws, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. Your tertiary relatives are your great-grandparents, great-grandchildren, great-aunts, great-uncles, and cousins. So our family systems. Families are people related by blood, marriage, or adoption. This diagram shows the three major family systems for the person in purple. The extended family is 2 or more generations of relatives. The family of orientation is the family into which the person is born or adopted. And the family of procreation is a person's spouse and children. So, who belongs to the family of procreation for the two dark green people? So, find what was the most universal social institution? The family. Family organization depends on the answers to 4 questions. How many marriage partners? Who lives with whom? How is the family membership determined? And who makes the decisions in the family? In most industrialized nations, an individual is allowed to be married to one person at a time. Monogamy, the marriage of one man to one woman. Polygamy, multiple marriage partners. Polygyny, one man and multiple women. This is the most common form of polygamy. And polyandry is one woman and multiple men. This is much less common. Newly married couples might be expected to live near wife's home, the husband's home, or their own. Descent patterns. Some societies trace their kinship through the mother's side, which is matrilineal. This is kind of a little more common in Africa and Asia. Some through the father's side, which is patrilineal, and it helps decide inheritance rules. And patrilineal societies tend to be on the European and East Asian side of the world. Authority patterns are patriarchy. Patriarchy, the father holds most of the authority. Patriarchy is the men have the power. Matriarchy, the mother holds most of the authority. And this is less frequent. That's where the women control the power. And egalitarian is mother and father share authority. Many industrialized societies are moving toward an egalitarian pattern. The United States is still a very patriarchal society, though it is more egalitarian than much of the world. Marriage and kinship terms. Sociologists use special terminology to describe families. Marriage partners. Monogamy, marriage of one man to one woman. Polygamy, marriage with multiple partners. Polygyny, marriage of one man to multiple women. Polyandry is marriage of one woman to multiple men. Residential patterns are patrilocality, where the couple lives near the husband's parents. Matrilocality, the couple lives near the wife's parents. Bilocality, the couple decides which parents to live with or near. Neolocality, couple lives apart from both sets of parents. Descent patterns. Patrilineal descent. Kinship is traced through a father's family. Property is passed from father to son. In a matrilineal descent, kinship is traced through the mother's family. Property is passed from mother to daughter. Bilateral descent, kinship is traced through both parents' property and inherited from either side of the family. Authority patterns. The patriarchy, the father holds most of the authority. Matriarchy, the mother holds most of the authority. In egalitarian, the authority is shared between mother and father. So what is the name for marriage of one woman to multiple men? Identify the supporting details. What are 2 forms of polygamy? Polygyny and polyandry. Genealogy. Why are genealogy? Genealogy is tracing a family's ancestors in history, has long been a popular hobby. In the past, it required travel to libraries and courthouses and other places where ancestors had lived. Researchers would dig through musty files and record books in search of birth certificates, census records, and other documents. With the advent of the internet, much of the research has moved online. Thousands of websites specialize in genealogical research. There are so many of these sites that people have created online genealogy directories, sites that contain lists and descriptions of the genealogical websites. There are also genealogy-specific search engines, results for typing in a family name into the general purpose search. The engine would include most pages with irrelevant information. The genealogy-specific search engines restrict search to genealogy sites and produce much better results. Many sites have electronic copies of documents important to genealogical research. Social Security records, census forms, and other documents are all available online. However, some significant records are not yet available online and still require old-fashioned methods of research. Genealogy is an extremely popular hobby, and many of the sites charge fees, but millions of people are willing to pay for easy access to family records. There are also now a new type of genealogical website where you actually submit a sample of your DNA and you try to find your relatives through DNA records in order to find long lost relatives. So why are there so many genealogy websites? The functions of the family. Regulation of sexual activity is one of the main functions of our family structure. All societies regulate our sexual activity to some extent. Incest is taboo, is found in every society, but categories of restricted relatives differ across cultures. Reproduction. One of the most important functions of the family is reproduction of the family. The family is an approved social unit for producing members to replace those who die or move away. Rules are set in place about who can raise children and how children should be raised. Socialization. The family is the first agent of socialization, so society relies on the family to teach the norms of society. Parents, siblings, and other relatives serve as the earliest role models. In fact, Confucius even suggested that when society is in collapse, it's because the families are not well. Economic and emotional security. Family is the basic economic unit. Family is expected to guide the psychological development of its members and provide a loving environment. So what are the four basic functions of every family? Regulation of sexual activity, reproduction, socialization, economic and emotional security. Section 2. Families in the United States. Most families in the United States begin with courtship, followed by marriage. The way families in the United States handle responsibilities has changed. Violence within families remains one of the leading forms of disruption of the family. Many marriages end in divorce, which also disrupts families. Families face other disruptions later in life. In the United States, families usually begin with marriage. They are also subject to many different forms of disruptions. So, at the end of this section, you should understand how have courtships and marriage changed? How do U.S. families distribute responsibilities? And is the family violence increasing? What is the divorce rate? And what disruptions do families experience later in life? The typical American family consists of a working father, a stay-at-home mother, and children in school. is only one of many kinds of family in the United States, as we know from our introduction. Some families are married, a couple without children, a family with only one parent, or children living with grandparents instead of parents. Most families begin with a marriage. Romantic love is the most common basis of marriage in the United States. Most Americans marry someone similar to themselves in terms of age, socioeconomic status, religion, and race. So it's homogamy. Heteromogamy is marriage between individuals who have different social characteristics. So how do most U.S. families begin? Through courtship and marriage. Basically, they date and then they get married. In order to survive, families need to provide shelter, food, clothing for all members of the family. In the mid-1900s, many American families followed a similar pattern of working father, stay-at-home mother, and children who helped with the chores and went to school. Later, the dual-earner families, in which both husband and wife have jobs, became the norm during the late 1900s. This was largely in part because of the women's movement and women trying to also take part in the workforce. Today, daycare centers care for children, and fathers are more likely to help with household chores. What responsibilities do all families need to fulfill? Provide shelter, food, and clothing for all members and care for children. Child care arrangements. Options for child care in the United States: about half of children younger than 3 years of age are cared for by their parents. The majority of children from 3 to 5 years of age receive care from someone other than their parent. When a relative takes care of children, it's usually a grandparent. People caring for unrelated children include nannies, neighbors, informal daycare based in homes. Over half of the children from 3 to 5 years of age attend daycare centers or preschools, including the Head Start program. Family violence. Some families argue that family violence is the most devastating family disruption. Family violence occurs among all social classes and racial and ethnic groups, but generally goes unreported in middle and upper class families. In 1975, a study concluded 1/3 of the people interviewed had experienced some form of violence in the family. Wives are just likely as husbands to commit the violence, but of a less severe nature. Family violence has decreased since the 1975 study, but it remains a serious problem to this day. Neglect of children is a form of child abuse. Child abuse has caused at least 1,500 deaths in 2006. Which of the social classes does family violence affect? All social classes, though middle class and upper class families it is reported less frequently. Divorce. Significant family disruption. About 40 to 45% of marriages end in divorce. The U.S. divorce rate is one of the highest in the world. Age, education level, race, and ethnicity are the factors in the divorce rate. Divorce affects women more in economic ways and men more in emotional ways. Children of divorced parents often struggle to adjust. 4 reasons for the rising divorce rate. Laws governing divorce make the process easier than in the past. It used to be that you had to, the only way you could get a divorce was infidelity. So you had to accuse the other person of infidelity, and that was really one of the few acceptable reasons for divorce. And at other times in history, only the man could file for divorce. Increase in working wives make leaving the husband more economically feasible. For women, in the times where they were more dependent on men, it made it very difficult for them to leave. Yet, even still today, with women making less money than men, that when they divorce their husbands, oftentimes the women are left in a much more economically disadvantaged position, and oftentimes end up in poverty as a result. Society attaches less stigma to divorce than it used to. It used to be that you were considered a failure if you were divorced. Now it's much more acceptable. Many people expect more from marriage and are less ready to accept marital problems. And so people have a higher expectation for satisfaction when it comes to marriage. Another reason that's not mentioned, that we haven't mentioned so far, is the church in many cases has often found divorce much more acceptable than it had in the past, depending on your faith. As divorce became more socially acceptable in the United States, the divorce rate skyrocketed, although the rate has begun to decrease. Close to half of all the marriages end in divorce. 1 in 5 of adult Americans who have ever been divorced. 38% of marriages in which one or both partners had been previously divorced. 8 years average length of the first marriage that ends in divorce. 5.3 per 1,000 divorce rate in the United States at its peak in 1981. Incidentally, that 8 years, that helps give us that the explanation for the term the 7-year itch. At that 7 years, people start to have wandering eyes because of one reason or another, they've become dissatisfied with their marriage. And of course, in the 8th year, they would get divorced. So 6.4 per 1,000 is the divorce rate in Nevada in 2004. So does divorce stop people from getting married again? What statistic shows this based on this? Identify supporting details. What is the rate of divorce in the United States? About 40 to 45%. Oftentimes it's just referred to as half, but really it's not quite half. Disruptions later in life in the family, there's a thing called the empty nest. It occurs when children leave home. Oftentimes with empty nest, what's called empty nest syndrome, mothers may feel increased satisfaction after the children have left. In recent years, the empty nest stage has often been delayed. About 12% of 25 to 34-year-olds still live at home with their parents. Oftentimes they call these the boomerang kids, where they go, where the parents send them off to college and then they come back home. And this is largely because as beginning workers, they aren't paid as well, and with the higher costs of living and housing, it becomes difficult to live independently from your parents. Another is family dissolution. It occurs when one spouse dies. Widowed women frequently face economic problems and increased levels of loneliness. A widowed woman has lower economic opportunities because women typically are paid less, and oftentimes it's difficult to replace her spouse's income. Identity problems can occur if the widow has defined herself primarily in terms of being a wife. And this is one of the problems with being a stay-at-home spouse, is that when your other spouse dies, you're forced back into the workplace after a term of absence from the workforce. So what are the two main sources of disruption later in life? Children leaving home and the death of the spouse. Section 3, recent trends in marriage and family. People have begun to delay getting married for economic reasons. Some women choose to postpone having children so that they can pursue their careers, making families smaller. Many married couples choose to never have children. And in most American families, both the mother and the father work. About a quarter of families in the United States are led by a single parent, and many divorced people get remarried and new families are formed as a result. So the main idea of this section is that family arrangements that once seemed unusual have become the norm in the United States. So at the end of this section, is delayed marriage a new thing? Why do some couples delay childbearing? Why are some dual earner marriages? How many one-parent families are there, and what are the consequences of remarriage? Delayed marriage. In 1890, the median age for the first marriage in the United States was 22 years for women and 26.1 years for men. In 1950, the median age had dropped 20.3 years for women and 22.8 years for men. So actually, in 1950, people were getting married sooner than their grandparents. In 2000, the median age was 25.1 years for women and 26.8 years for men. So as you can see, in 2000, the age started to go back up. These marriages are used as evidence. These figures are used as evidence that being single has once again become an acceptable alternative to being married. Today, young people are delaying marriage in order to finish their education and start their careers without being in a binding relationship. Also, there's an increase in cohabitation rates that also contributes to delayed marriage ages. Couples oftentimes now will live together for a period of time before deciding to get married. Their age at first marriage. This graph shows the median age at first marriage for men and women in the United States from 1890 to 2000. The median is a type of statistic that shows the middle value of any group of figures. From 1890 to 1950, the median age at first marriage generally followed a downward trend. An exception to this trend occurred in 1920 to 1940 as the median age for women rose slightly. From 1960 to 2000, the median age at first marriage for both men and women followed an upward trend. So when was the median age of first marriage the lowest? Is delayed marriage a new trend? It's not a new trend, though it's new for the delay to be as long as it is today. In the past, having children was the primary purposes of marriage. Now many couples have other priorities than children. Couples oftentimes delay their childbearing. Time between the marriage and first child averaged 15 months in the 1960s. Women over 30 accounted for 40% of the births in 2004. The sandwich generation are couples who have babies and elderly parents to care for at the same time. Childlessness. Some couples choose to wait for children, but end up waiting too long. Voluntary childlessness is the conscious choice to remain childless. Some couples choose to go without having children. Couples who choose to remain childless often have high levels of education and income, and coincidentally also report higher happiness levels than couples with children. Why do some couples choose to remain childless? To complete their education, to establish a career, to have more freedom, more financial security, and have private time as a couple, allowing them to travel and do other things. Dual earner marriages. In 1940, about 17% of married women worked outside the home. Today, about 61% of married women work outside the home. Few families today can survive or live as comfortably as they want on a single salary. After World War II, there was an increase in jobs, and women were able to enter the workforce. Women's participation in the labor force is influenced by the ages of their children. In 1993, law required most companies to give up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to new parents. Usually only to the woman, however. Now it's often some what's called paternity leave. Maternity leave is for mothers, paternity leave is for dad. And so this allows a lot of families, this allows for better child care for the first few months of a baby's life, where mom stays home for 10 or 12 weeks and then dad stays home for 10 or 12 weeks. Research fails to confirm any negative effect on children of working mothers. Daughters of working mothers often have better self-image and are more independent and higher achievers than the daughters of stay-at-home mothers. So why are there so many dual earner families? Because women have entered into the workforce in greater numbers and have been provided with greater opportunities thanks to the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. Single parenting. One-parent families are formed through separation, divorce, death of a spouse, to unwed mothers, or adoption by unmarried individuals. One-parent families account for about 25% of U.S. families with children under the age of 18. Women head 70% of these. Single-parent families face emotional responsibility and task overload. There's a lack of money because it's only a single income family and is a major source of stress. Many single-parent households are run by dads. What trends may have contributed to the rise of single-parent households? Only fathers lead 12 to 20% of single-parent households. What three problems do most single parents face? The responsibility overload, task overload, and emotional overload. In 1/3 of the marriages occurring today, one or both of the partners have been previously married. The majority of people who get divorced eventually remarried. Step families or blended families arise when one or both of the marriage partners bring children from the previous marriages into their family. About 17% of children under 18 live in step families. The process of adjustment is sometimes a source of conflict in the family. Studies show that it takes approximately 4 years for children to accept a step parent. So that's where the kids will give you a hard time for the first 4 years of your marriage to another person. What is another name for a step family? The blended family. All right, so this is our lab. This one you'll be going out and doing some interviews. What we're going to study is how have families changed over the past 40 years or so. So, your introduction in this lab, you'll explore the changes that have occurred in the family during the last 60 years. You'll ask older people how life was different when they were younger. So, to conduct your interview one person who's at least 60 years old. Try to find several people to interview. But for some of you, finding a 60-year-old might be difficult. Arrange the interview. Use the list of questions and create 3 of your own. I'll give you a list of questions in a minute here. Be courteous and use follow-up questions to gather information. Documentation and analysis. Organize your notes. Type handwritten notes. Transcribe any audio or video recording you made. Review your notes and what you learned about life in the past. Prepare to present your findings to your class. Prepare brief description of your interview subjects. Then, share the findings with your class. Then hold a discussion. Did all the interviewees present the same picture of the family life? How has family life changed? How is family life the same? Would you rather live in the past or today? And what was the most surprising thing that you learned? So this is an example of what your interview should sound like. The transcript of the conversation with Mr. Evans-Jones. The conversation took place on April 10th from 7 to 7:30. Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Jones. To begin the interview, could you just tell me a little about yourself? Mr. Jones, well, sure. I'm 68 years old and I've lived in Maryland my entire life. I'm married to a wonderful woman and I have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Where in Maryland did you grow up? My family lived on the eastern shore near Chestertown. So this is just an example of what your interview will look like. And then you will come up with further questions to ask them about their family life, what was marriage like, things like that, to help you develop an opinion of the family for older people. All right, that completes our chapter on 12 on the family. Good luck on working on your lab, and we'll discuss this in a later date.